it's about ADHD, which is a topic that is generally not political, although I have in the past in many of my writings and a lot of my speaking on this topic. I started writing about this in 1993. And well, actually, the first time I wrote about it was in 1980, a piece that was published in the Journal of Orthomolecular Psychiatry on the hyperactive syndrome. And the political, where I get political is generally when I'm talking about, how do we fix our schools so that they work for ADHD kids as well as everybody else. But generally speaking, this is not going to be a political website. This is going to be is a website, about ADHD. And I originated this concept back in 1993 of a hunter in the farmer's world as a way of describing. It's kind of a metaphor, but over time what we've found is that there's actually probably some pretty good science behind it as a way of describing, particularly to children, but to adults as well, what it is that they're confronting when they are told that they have attention deficit hyperactive disorder or attention deficit disorder, or they're hyperactive or, whatever. And the reason I think this is so important is because we very much live our lives inside a box that we ourselves construct, or was constructed for us through our childhood by our parents and their society, the culture, and the people around us, that tells us what, it establishes a ceiling. You can't go any higher than this. This is the limit of your capabilities. It establishes a floor. This is what you could definitely do. It establishes the walls. These are the areas where you're not competent to do that, or you could definitely do that, those kind of things. We tell ourselves these stories about who we are and how we fit into the world. And these stories are incredibly important. I tell the story in this article. I believe it's in the What Maslow Overlooked. It might be in the other article. It's on our homepage at hunterinafarmersworld.com. Of a little girl named Shannon who was in a program that Louise and I ran years ago, a child care program, who had cigarette burns all over her body. She was and she was extremely violent, and she was convinced by her parents that she was no good. And the way that they disciplined her behavior, she was very ADHD. The way they disciplined her behavior was by putting cigarettes out on her, and it took us years, literally years, to convince Shannon that she was a worthy person, that she was worthy, that she could be loved, that she could be appreciated, that she could, that she was a decent human being. And, finally she got it, and it was a transformational moment. When we change those stories inside ourselves. So anyhow, the question that I was confronting when I came up with this concept of what's called thalamic gain, or what Maslow overlooked, was what is the neurochemistry? What is actually happening with ADD? Why does one kid sit quietly in a classroom and do his homework while the kid next to him is throwing spitballs? What's the difference between those two kids? Why is one kid content to sit and do his homework and another kid can't quite do it? He is constantly engaging in the outside world. He's constantly engaging with his teachers or his peers, often in a negative way, but constantly engaging. Why? Abraham Maslow posited a hierarchy of human needs. At the bottom was the need for homeostasis, the need to breathe and drink and eat and use the bathroom and things like that, maintain your body temperature. One step up from that was the need for safety. One step up from that was the low social needs, the need for family and basic friends, and you go all the way up through the hierarchy of human needs to the very top, self-actualization, enlightenment, spiritual understanding, or self-understanding. And what Maslow pointed out was that wherever you're stuck on the pyramid, everything above that point vanishes. So if you're crossing a street and suddenly the traffic starts flying around you on both sides and you're concerned you might get hit by a car, you're not thinking about your relationships. You're not thinking about your family. You're not thinking about your girlfriend or boyfriend. You're not thinking about dinner tonight. You're thinking about getting safe. You get locked down in that. So what I posited was that there is a need, a basic human need, one of these basic levels in Maslow's hierarchy that he missed. and that it would go just above safety and just below the social needs. In other words, people would be willing to violate the social needs in order to get this need met. And that need, I said, I believe, is the need to know that you're alive. Joseph Campbell, in The Power of Myth, 1988, he said, people say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're really seeking is the experience of being alive, so that our life experiences on the purely physical plane will have resources within them, resonances within them, within our own innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. Now, how do you know that you're alive? The way that we experience the world is through our five senses, right? What we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we smell, what we taste. And those five senses, four of those five senses, the exception of this is smell. Smell goes directly to the brain, right from the olfactory bulb in the nose, right into the brainstem, or right into the brain. But and that's why, you know, you walk into a place that has a particular smell that triggers a memory from childhood, and you just have no control over that memory. It's there. That's why fragrance is such powerful stuff. So anyhow, the other senses all go through a part of the brain called the thalamus, and the thalamus could be thought of as a volume control. The thalamus can turn up and turn down your sensory volume. I remember one time I was in a car accident. I was driving down the street, Grand River Avenue in East Lansing, Michigan, back in the early 70s, and it was winter and it was covered with ice. And my car I just lost control. And I started sliding into the oncoming traffic. Now, this was only 25 miles an hour, but I had a head-on collision with another car. And I remember to this day in slow motion. My thalamus, you know, as soon as my brain realized I was going to have a crash, my thalamus just turned up all my senses and slowed down time for me. And boom, you know, that happened. So other times, like, you know, when we fall asleep, our thalamus turns down our senses so that we're not, you know, awakened by every little thing that happens around us. But there's a baseline, there's a normal volume setting for the thalamus. And what I'm positing is that for normal people who can just sit and do their work, you know, without stimulation, their need to feel alive, their knowing that they're alive, their attachment to the sensory world is sufficient. They're getting enough light, enough sound, enough sensation that they know they're alive, and there's no doubt in their mind that they're alive. But I'm also positing that for people with ADHD, the thalamic gain, the volume control of the thalamus, is set at a set point slightly lower than for, quote, normal people. And therefore, you know, little Johnny's sitting in his classroom and his volume control is down to the point where he's not getting enough seeing and hearing and feeling that he knows that he's alive. And suddenly he starts feeling, oh my God, I'm dying, right? I'm not alive. I need to know that I'm alive. And so what does he do? He throws a spitball at little Jimmy sitting next to him and goes, hey! And the teacher's yelling at him, and suddenly the whole world lights up, right? A little jolt of adrenaline, and which turns up the volume control of the thalamus, and suddenly he's alive. Now, what do we do with this knowledge? What it tells us is, number one, it explains the paradoxical effect of stimulants. Why, when you give ADHD people stimulant medications, or even coffee, it calms them down. And the reason why is because it's turning up their volume control, their thalamic volume control, and they're experiencing the world in a more rich way, and now they're content, now they're satisfied, now they know they're alive. So that tells us that for our classrooms, for our schools, if we want to have classrooms that are friendly for normal kids and ADHD kids, that the way that we do that is by having classrooms that are engaging. When I was doing a lot of public speaking on ADHD back in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, I was in Taiwan, and I visited a classroom in Taiwan. They have really, really high quality education there. And in this classroom, now I don't speak Chinese, so I could only tell what was going on by watching. But the teacher stood up at the board, and she went through it was a math class, and she did the math on the board, and all the kids were making notes and, you know, following along. And then she sat down, and then she called on like 6 kids in the class. There were about 20 kids in the class. She called on about 5 or 6 of them, and those 5 or 6 stood up. and she sat down at her desk. And those 5 or 6 kids then had 3 or 4 kids around each one of them. They formed little pods, and the ones standing up would start talking and engaging with the ones who were sitting down. And one by one, the ones who were sitting down would start standing up. I didn't understand what was going on as I was watching this until the entire class was standing up. So afterwards, I asked the teacher what was going on there. And she said, I did the lesson. And then I said, now who understands this enough to teach it to somebody else? And 5 kids raised their hand and said, I can do it. And so I had them stand up and teach their little groups of their own peers. It's called peer education. And as their peers learned it, when they got to the point where they felt they could teach it, they stood up too. They didn't have to teach it, but they stood up to say, okay, now I get it. And we did that until everybody in the class was standing. Everybody was engaged. The need to feel alive was fully met. So anyway, that's the article that we emailed out last night to all the people who are subscribers. Again, it's free to hunterindafarmersworld.com. And it's called What Maslow Overlooked, The Need to Feel Alive. And, you know, I think you'll find it interesting, particularly if like me, you are an ADD person or you have ADD kids, I'm both, or, you know, you're interested in the topic.